In the days when the hearts of men grew proud, and their ears were closed to wisdom, there lived a man named Amiel, a servant of the Lord who dwelt in the hill country beyond the river. And the word of the Lord came to Amiel, saying, Speak this parable to the people, that they may understand and return to me. A certain man, Elier, built his house upon the sands of the southern plain, for the ground was level and the work was swift. His walls rose high, and his gates were adorned with gold, and all who passed by praised the work of his hands. But another man, Micah, labored many weeks to find stone beneath the soil, and though his progress was slow and his house plain, he built it upon the rock. And behold, in the season of rain, the sky darkened and the floods rose. The wind beat upon the houses with great fury. The house of Elier, though fair to look upon, found no footing, and its walls fell with a great crash. But the house of Micah stood firm, for it was founded on the rock, and the waters could not move it. Then the people came to Amiel and said, Surely this is a hard saying. Who can listen to it? But Amiel answered, saying, He who trusts in beauty. And speed shall stumble in the day of trial, but he who builds upon the word of the Lord shall never be shaken. For the Lord is the rock and the refuge of the faithful, and his counsel stands forever. Asterisk, and it came to pass in the days of drought, when the ground was cracked and the wells were dry, that there lived a widow named Sarah in the village of Beit Marah. She had no husband, for he had fallen in the days of war, and her only son was stricken with sickness, lying upon a mat with no strength to speak. And Sarah cried out to the Lord daily, saying, O God of my fathers, do not forget your servant, for I am surrounded by death. Her neighbors turned from her, saying, Surely the Lord has forsaken her, for her prayers are long, but her hands are empty. Yet Sarah rose each morning, and gave her last bread to the poor, and poured out the last of her oil for the stranger who passed her gate. One night, as she wept beside her son, a voice spoke in the darkness, saying, Sarah, daughter of mercy, rise and go to the mountain, for the Lord has heard your cry. And though she was weary and afraid, she obeyed. She walked 3 days without food, guided only by the stars, until she came to the place where the almond trees grow wild. There she knelt and said, Lord, I am here. And the heavens opened, and a gentle rain fell upon her, though no rain was seen in the land. When she returned to her house, behold, her son sat upright and asked for bread, and strength returned to his limbs. Then the people marveled and said, Who is this woman, that the Lord should answer her? And it was told them, She is one who gives when she has nothing, and believes though she cannot see. From that day the village was blessed with rain, and Sarah's name was remembered among the righteous. For the Lord does not look upon riches or power, but upon the heart that is faithful in the fire. Asterisk, and in the days when kings built towers to the sky, and named cities after their own glory, there ruled a man called Hadron, son of Zerah, in the Asura, land of Alar. His throne was of ivory, and his crown bore 7 rubies. And the people feared him more than they feared the Lord. He said in his heart, I am the light of this nation, and my word is law. And he caused his image to be carved in stone and placed at every gate, and the poor cried out, but were unheard. Then the word of the Lord came to Malach, a prophet clothed in sackcloth, saying, Go to the king, and speak my words to him, whether he will hear or refuse. And Malach came before the palace with no sword, no scroll, and said aloud, O king, your throne shall crack, and your crown shall fall, for you have exalted yourself and forgotten the one who gave you breath. But Hadron laughed and said, Is this not the voice of a madman? Who made you judge over me? And he cast Malach into prison, and called for musicians to drown out his words. Yet in the night Hadron dreamed a dream, and behold, his palace fell into the sea, and his crown was swallowed by fire. And he stood naked before the Lord. He awoke trembling, and none of his magicians could give the meaning. Then he sent for Malach, and the prophet said, "You have seen what is to come, and it is not too late. Break your pride like pottery, and seek the face of the Lord." And Hadron wept and removed his crown, and sat in ashes for 7 days. He freed the slaves, tore down his images, and rebuilt the temple that his fathers had abandoned. And the Lord saw his repentance and showed him mercy. From that day, Hadron ruled with justice and fear of God, and the people rejoiced, for righteousness had returned to the land. And the name of Malach was written in the chronicles of the kings, not for his power, but for his faithfulness to speak truth without fear. And in the 12th year of the silence, when no prophet walked the streets and the altars were cold, a man named Ezra, son of Yedidiah, cried out to the Lord from the ruins of Tel Aaron, saying, "O God of light, has your fire gone out? Shall the righteous vanish, and none remember your name?" And on the 7th night, while he lay among broken stones, a great brightness shone around him, and an angel of the Lord stood before him, clothed in flame, and his voice was like many waters. And he said, "Rise, Ezra, for your cry has been heard, and I have come to show you what is and what shall be." And the angel touched his eyes, and behold, Ezra saw the city as it truly was. The gates hung crooked, the priests slept, and the people feasted in shadows. The lamps were full of smoke, and idols sat where the scrolls once lay. Then Ezra wept and said, "Is there no hope?" But the angel answered, "Look again." And Ezra looked, and beneath the dust he saw a small light, hidden under stone, burning without. Oil. And the angel said, "That is the remnant. Though forgotten by men, it is known to heaven. Go now and speak what you have seen. Whether they listen or mock, do not remain silent, for the light shall grow, and the Lord shall visit this place again." And the angel was gone. Then Ezra rose with fire in his bones, and stood in the market, and cried aloud, saying, "Return to the Lord, O people of Tel Aaron. Tear down your idols and uncover the flame." And though many laughed and said, "He is mad," a few came to him in secret, and the light spread from house to house. And in time the priests awoke, the scrolls were opened, and the city turned its face again to the Lord. And it was written that in the days of darkness one man saw light and spoke, and the heavens remembered his name. And there was a man without name or nation, who walked from land to land with no sword, no coin, and no sandals on his feet. His cloak was torn, his beard unshaven, and his staff made of olive wood. Yet wherever he passed, peace followed him, and those who saw him could not explain the stirring in their hearts. In the city of Asham, where merchants cheated and judges slept, he sat at the gate and gave bread to children and silence to those who argued. And some said, "Who is this man, that he speaks little and changes much?" And others mocked, saying, "A beggar with no roof cannot teach us who dwell in houses of stone." But on the 3rd day a fire broke out in the upper quarter, and smoke filled the streets, and the people ran without knowing where to go. And the man walked calmly through the fire, and his robe was not burned, and he carried 3 children from the flames. And when the people fell silent, he said only, "Fear not the fire of earth, but the fire of the heart that forgets mercy." Then he left the city as quietly as he came, and no one saw where his feet turned. Yet in every town he entered, the sick found rest, the proud were troubled, and the weary were comforted. Some said he was a prophet, others an angel, and a few believed he was sent from the Lord. And when asked his name, he said, "I am one who remembers." And it was written in the scrolls of the wise, "A righteous man passed through our gates and left. No gold, yet we are richer than before. For he walked not with power, but with peace, and wherever peace walks, the Lord is near. Asterisk, the kingdom of heaven is like a woman who lit a lamp in the night and placed it upon her window for all to see. The flame was small, but steady, and it gave light to the path below, where many feet stumbled. And the wind rose from the wilderness, sharp and unseen, and it beat upon the flame to snuff it out. But the woman stood beside the lamp and shielded it with her hand, and she whispered, "Though none thank me, still I will keep the light." And the wind returned, stronger than before, and brought dust and darkness. And the voices of those in the street cried, "Cover the lamp, for it is too small to stand." Yet the woman answered not, but poured fresh oil, and watched through the night. And behold, one by one, travelers came to her door, saying, "We were lost, but we saw your light and found our way." And the woman said, "I did not call you, but the light did." Then a great storm fell upon the land, and many lights were taken, and only hers remained. And when the dawn broke, her lamp still burned. And the Lord said, "This is the faith I seek, not loud, not proud, but steady in the storm. For many kindle fire when the sun is shining, but blessed is the one who keeps the flame through the night." And the light became a fire, and the fire became a beacon, and all who saw it gave glory not to the woman, but to the one who gave her strength to endure. Asterisk. In the land of Zophar, where the hills roll like waves, and the sun burns the grass by midday, there lived a boy named Caleb, son of Neriah, who kept the sheep of his father beneath the tamarisk trees. He was the youngest of 4 sons, and the least spoken of, for his brothers were men of strong arms and loud words. But Caleb was quiet, and his eyes watched the sky more than the field. And the people of the village said, "This one is a dreamer, not fit for labor." Yet Caleb sang to the lambs and called each by name, and none strayed far from him. And it came to pass that a lion came from the east, driven from the mountains by famine, and it crept into the fold by night and took a lamb in its jaws. And Caleb awoke to the bleating and ran barefoot through the thorny path with only a sling and a staff. And the lion turned to him, its eyes like fire, and the ground shook beneath its growl. But Caleb did not flee, and he said aloud, "The Lord is my strength and my portion, and this lamb is his." And he took a stone from the earth and placed it in the sling. And he prayed not for power, but for aim. And the stone flew, and the lion fell. And Caleb stood over the beast with shaking hands, not in pride, but in awe. And when he returned to the village with the lamb in his arms, and the lion behind him, the people were astonished, and said, "Who is this child, that he should slay the king of beasts?" And Caleb answered, "I am no king, and no slayer, but a servant of the shepherd who watches over all." From that day the elders looked upon him with new eyes. But Caleb returned to the field, and spoke little of what had happened. And in the quiet of the next morning, a man clothed in a dark robe came to him on the hill and said, "The Lord has seen your heart, and the day will come when you will no longer guard sheep, but lead men." And Caleb said, "I am not worthy, nor do I understand these things." But the man answered, "You need not understand to obey, and the Lord chooses not as men choose." And he departed, and none knew where he came from. And the days passed, and Caleb grew in wisdom and patience, and though his hands remained calloused and his robe torn, the Spirit of the Lord rested upon him. And when war came to the land, and the people cried for deliverance, it was not the strongest nor the loudest who stood before them, but Caleb, son of Neriah, who walked with the staff and the sling, and a fire in his soul that no lion could quench. Asterisk. There were 2 cities in the days before the harvest, one built of stone, the other of sand. The city of stone stood upon a hill, with walls high and gates of iron, and its people were proud, saying, "We have built this with our hands, and none can." Bring it down. Its towers pierced the clouds, and the names of its builders were carved into marble. They sang songs of their greatness and looked down upon all who passed by. But the city of sand lay in the valley, hidden among reeds and low trees without towers or walls. Its houses were shaped by the hands of many, and no name was lifted above another. They sang songs of the rain and of mercy, and they welcomed strangers without question. One day a voice was heard across the plain, saying, "Behold, a wind is coming, not seen by the eyes nor heard by the ears, but sent by the Lord to test what is true." And the sky darkened, and the wind began to blow. At first the city of stone stood firm, and the people mocked, saying, "The wind cannot move us." But the breath of the Lord is not like the wind of men. It entered the cracks of pride and turned stone against stone, and the weight of the walls became their burden. And the towers fell inward, and the names carved in marble were broken. But the wind passed over the city of sand, and though the roofs trembled and dust filled the air, the people clung to one another, and their houses held, for they were joined not by mortar, but by love. And when the wind ceased, only the city of sand remained, shining in the light of the morning. Then a voice came again, saying, "What is written on stone may crumble, but what is written on the hearts of the lowly shall endure. Let him who boasts remember the dust from which he came, and let him who serves rejoice, for the Lord sees not the height of the wall, but the depth of the foundation." And from that day the people of the valley were known not for their strength, but for their wisdom, and their name was written not on towers, but in the memory of heaven. And in the town of El Nava, where the houses were painted with gold, but the hearts of men were far from wisdom, there lived a child named Eliar, son of no great man, whose mother swept the temple steps, and whose father was not known. The elders spoke much and prayed long, but their words were full of dust, and none listened for truth any more. But Eliar was quiet, and his days were spent beneath the fig tree, reading what little he could from broken scrolls and asking questions. No one had time to answer. And it came to pass that on the night of the new moon, while the city feasted and forgot the Lord, the child lay upon his mat and dreamed. And in his dream a voice like deep water called him, saying, "Eliar, Eliar, rise, for I have something to show you." And he said, "Who are you, my Lord?" And the voice said, "I am." And behold, the roof was taken away, and he saw the city from above, and every house glowed either with light or smoke. And the voice said, "The light is mercy, and the smoke is pride." And Eliar asked, "What shall I do, for I am only a child?" And the Lord said, "Speak what you have seen, and do not fear their faces." And he awoke with tears on his cheeks and trembling in his bones, but his heart was filled with fire. And he went to the temple and cried aloud, saying, "The Lord has spoken." In the night, and he searches the hearts of this city. Turn back, O priests, from your empty prayers, and you who walk in robes but forget the poor, bend your knees and uncover your eyes. And they laughed and said, "Who is this boy, that he should teach us?" But the people heard, and some were pierced. And that night an earthquake shook the city, and the golden houses cracked. But Eliar and his mother were safe beneath the fig tree. And the people said, "Perhaps the Lord has spoken through the child." And from that day, though he was young, many sought his counsel. And he spoke little, but when he spoke, the wind stood still to hear. For the Lord delights in the small voice that listens, and chooses not the high seat, but the low heart. And Eliar grew in favor with God and men, not for what he knew, but for whom he followed. And his words were remembered when the scrolls of the elders were forgotten. And there came a night in the land of men when the stars gave no light. The moon did not rise, and the heavens gave no voice. The prophets were silent. The dreams ceased, And not a word was heard from the mouth of the Lord. And the people trembled, saying, Has the Almighty turned his face from us? Has he forgotten the work of his hands? In that same hour, a man named Javan, a watchman of the hill country, stood alone by the eastern wall, and lifted his eyes to the black sky, and said, O Lord, my ears are open, but I hear nothing. My heart waits, but no answer comes. And he fasted by day, and lay on the cold stone by night, and still the silence endured. Others mocked him, saying, Fool, your prayers go no higher than the smoke of your lamp. Even the birds do not cry at night now, what hope have you? But Javan said, Though he slay me, yet will I wait. For I do not worship the voice, but the one who speaks. And as he waited, the city turned to its idols, carving them from silver and cedar, and dancing before them, crying, These are our gods now, for they do not sleep, and they answer quickly. But Javan remained by the wall, watching, waiting, earning the last of his oil, though no light shone on his face. And on the 40th night a wind passed through the trees, soft and without sound, and a fire came down, not like lightning, but like breath, and it rested upon the stone where he knelt. And the voice of the Lord spoke within him, not loud, but clear, saying, Javan, servant of silence, I have watched your waiting, and I have counted your tears. I did not speak, for the hearts of men desired my words more than my presence. But you loved me even in the dark. Therefore I make you a sign. From this place where none could hear, my voice shall thunder again. And in the days to come, when men seek me in noise and cannot find me, they will remember the night I answered one man in silence. And the fire did not consume Javan, but entered him, and his face was like one who had seen the mountain. And when he came down from the wall, the people were afraid, for though he spoke no word, they heard something in his stillness that shook them. And thus it is written, Blessed is the one who waits not for miracles, but remains faithful in the eye. Silence, for to him the heavens will speak when the world no longer listens. Asterisk. Asterisk. And it was told among the elders that in the days when the kingdom of Davar prospered, and men clothed themselves in gold, yet knew not the weight of mercy, there came a stranger through the northern gate, bearing with him neither sword nor scroll, but a single mirror wrapped in linen. He spoke little, but where he walked, the noise of the market fell to silence, and those who met his eyes turned away with trembling. He came to the center of the city and stood beside the well, and the people gathered, saying, Who is this traveler, who carries no wares, yet walks like one who owns the earth? And the stranger said, I bring not riches nor riddles, but a gift, a mirror not made by man, whose glass reflects not the face, but the soul. And some laughed, saying, What trick is this? But others pressed forward with curiosity. Then he unwrapped the mirror, and its surface shone like still water at midnight, and none could see their image in it until they stood alone before it, and one by one they came. A merchant approached, proud of his wealth, but when he gazed into the mirror, he fell back with a cry, for he saw his hands stained with the tears of the poor, and his tongue coiled with lies. A judge came next, robed in honor, but the mirror showed him scales twisted by bribes, and a heart hollow like dead wood. A priest stepped forward, sure of his piety, but the mirror revealed a flame long extinguished and lips that spoke words without belief. And so the crowd grew restless, and many turned away, covering their faces, saying, This mirror is cursed. Break it and cast it from the city. But a child stepped forth, barefooted and clothed in rags, and when she looked into the mirror, she saw nothing but light, and in the light a voice whispered, You are known and beloved. Then the stranger said, The mirror does not lie, but it wounds to heal. That which you hide is known above. Would you rather walk blind with clean faces than see with broken hearts? And the rulers of the city, fearing the mirror more than sword or storm, seized the stranger and cast him out beyond the walls, burying the mirror in the dust. But the people remembered, and in the days of drought and war that followed, some would go secretly by night and dig in the ground, searching for the glass that showed truth. And it was said that those who found it and bore its vision with repentance were given peace not known in palaces, nor bought with silver. And so it is written, "Blessed is the one who dares to look and does not turn away, for though the truth cuts deep, it is the hand of the Lord that holds the blade, and he wounds only to restore." Asterisk, and in the city of Kirith, where the gates were, polished with silver, and the streets swept daily with pride, there came a beggar on a cold morning, clothed in rags and ash, with eyes like burning coals hidden beneath a hood. He leaned upon a broken staff and asked for bread, but the merchants passed by, and nobles drew their cloaks tighter, saying, "Go from us, for we do not feed the lazy, nor clothe the cursed." He sat beside the fountain where water flowed for the rich, but was guarded from the poor, and children were told, "Do not speak to him, for he brings shame upon our beauty." And yet the beggar sang. He sang in a tongue none knew, and though his voice was weak, those who heard it felt their hearts stirred, as if remembering something they had long buried beneath stone and wealth. A woman who sold fruit gave him a bruised fig, and he smiled and blessed her, and her tree bore double fruit that season. A boy gave him a crust of bread, and the boy's father found favor in the city gate. But the rulers of Kirith grew angry, for the people began to whisper, saying, "Who is this one whose presence brings strange blessings, though he begs and bleeds in the street?" And they sent guards to drive him out. The beggar rose, his face bruised from stones, and said, "I asked for bread, and you gave me none. I asked for water, and you gave me scorn. I asked for shelter, and you gave me chains. Yet know this, the Lord of hosts walked among you in disguise, and you knew him not. I came not to take, but to test, not to shame, but to seek. What you did not do for the least, you did not do for me." And with that, he turned toward the eastern gate and vanished into light, though none saw the sun rise that day. And from that hour, the city of Kirith knew drought and sorrow, for the blessing that had come in rags was turned away in pride. But the woman who gave the fig, and the boy who gave the bread, they became as lights in the land, and their names were remembered long after the marble of Kirith had crumbled. And thus it is written, "Be careful whom you turn away at the gate, for heaven often knocks in silence, and the angels wear no crowns." Asterisk, and before the cities were built, and before the languages were divided, before iron pierced the earth and pride rose higher than prayer, there stood in the heart of the world a single tree, planted by the hand of the Lord himself on the 6th day. Its roots reached the deep places where no man has walked, and its branches stretched toward the stars. It was neither the tree of life nor the tree of knowledge, but a witness, silent and enduring, whose bark bore the scent of Eden, and whose leaves whispered the songs sung at the dawn of time. And though men forgot the garden, and angels no longer guarded the gate, the tree remained hidden, veiled by cloud and shadow, seen only by those whom heaven allowed. Ages passed, and empires rose and fell, and fires scorched the earth, and waters covered the hills, yet the tree stood. One day, in the time of kings and quarrels, a boy fleeing war wandered through the wilderness, his feet torn and his heart empty. He had lost father and mother, and did not know the name of hope. And he came upon the tree, not knowing how, for the way was closed to the proud, but open to the broken. And he sat beneath its branches and wept, and the tree listened. And the wind carried his weeping into the heavens. That night the boy dreamed, and in the dream the tree spoke, not with voice, but with memory, showing him the days when the earth was young and unbroken, when every creature sang, and man walked with God in the cool of the evening. And it showed him the day of exile, when the gates of Eden shut, and a flame was placed before the path. And then it showed him a day yet to come, when the gates would open again, not by sword, but by sacrifice. The boy awoke with light in his eyes and left the tree with no map, but with a calling. He would grow to be a prophet, though no one knew his name. And wherever he spoke, the weary listened, for they heard in his voice the rustling of ancient leaves. The tree remained, still watching, still waiting, and though its name is not written in any book, it knows every name ever spoken, and it is said that when the last trumpet sounds, and the stars fall like figs from the shaken sky, the tree will rise, and its roots will burst through stone and steel, and Eden will blossom again, not behind walls, but in the hearts of the redeemed. And thus it is written, what was planted by God cannot be uprooted by time, and though forgotten by man, the witnesses of heaven remember all. Asterisk, and there was a man named Seraphon, old and bent, whose days were long, and whose voice had not been heard in the city for 3 generations. He lived beyond the olive fields, where the wind forgot to pass, and even the birds did not sing. The people said he was mad, or perhaps already dead, but no one dared draw near, for in his house was a book that no one had opened, a book older than kings, bound in skin no beast had ever worn, sealed with 7 rings of brass and ash. It was said the Lord had spoken to him once in youth, and told him, you shall write 1 word, and that word shall end the writing, but the time is not yet. And so Seraphon waited. He waited through the rise and ruin of kingdoms, through the silence of the prophets and the noise of the wise, through the weeping of the poor and the boasting of the rich. He waited while temples were built and burned, while names came and vanished, while mountains shook and children forgot how to pray. And he aged not like others, his skin like parchment, his bones like reeds, for he had not yet fulfilled the task. Once every 100 years a messenger would come, robed in flame or clothed in storm, asking, is it time? And Seraphon would answer, not yet, for the ink is not dry, and they would depart. But in the 1000th year, as the sky grew dim, the rivers turned to shadow, the last messenger came, neither bright nor terrible, but quiet as the breath between heartbeats, and said, it is time. And Seraphon rose, slowly as one who stands from the grave, and took the quill carved from the feather of an unnamed angel, and opened the book, and saw every word written from the beginning, from let there be to it is finished, all names, all tears, all light and loss written and sealed. And on the last page, blank and waiting, he dipped the quill and wrote 1 word. No one knows what he wrote, for when he closed the book, the stars paused, the seas stilled, and the breath of God moved once more through the world like wind through dry leaves. Then Seraphon lay down and did not rise, but his face bore a peace that only those who finish their task may wear. And the book was taken, not by hand, but by glory, and hidden beyond time. And it is said that on the day the trumpet sounds, that word will echo louder than thunder and softer than mercy, and all who hear it will remember what they were made for. And thus it is written, many live loudly and are forgotten, but blessed is the one who waits faithfully and writes only when heaven speaks. And there was a city with no name, built where 4 deserts met, and the wind never stopped crying. It was not marked on any map, nor remembered in any lineage, for those who lived there had forgotten the voice of the Lord, though they still wore robes and offered incense to empty sky. They had towers but no altars, songs but no prayers, and though the city prospered by gold and blood, no one rejoiced. The children were silent, the old ones afraid to dream, and the rulers spoke only of power and survival. And it came to pass, On a night when the moon failed to rise, and the stars turned away, that a traveler came to the gate, clothed in dust and silence. He bore no mark of tribe or nation, and his eyes were deeper than time. The watchman asked his name, and he said, I was before names. They asked his purpose, and he said, to pass through. But they would not let him, saying, None may enter who has no trade, no scroll, no coin. So he sat outside the gate and waited. At dawn, a leper came and knelt before him, and the traveler touched his face, and the man was clean. A widow brought him a crust of bread, and her empty jar overflowed with oil. A child lay dying near the wall, and he breathed once into her mouth, and she rose and laughed. Word spread like fire through the city, and the rulers grew afraid. They said, Who is this one who changes what is fixed? Who gives what we have taxed, and healed what we have cursed? Let him be brought in and questioned. But when they came to the gate, the traveler was gone. They searched the roads and the wells, the markets and the graves, but found only a pair of footprints burned into the stone, and a silence that could not be broken. And that night the wind turned and howled through the city like a voice long restrained. The towers shook, the idols cracked, and every door was opened by an unseen hand. And the people wept, not for what was taken, but for what had been among them without welcome. And from that day no one dwelt in the city. Its name was erased, its walls swallowed by sand. But wanderers still pass that way, and speak of a strange stillness, and some hear a voice in the wind that says, I was here once. And thus it is written, Woe to the place that entertains glory as a stranger, and blessed are those who recognize the Lord before he departs. Asterisk, and in the hill country beyond the river of glass, where the stars were seen clearer than the laws of men, there lived a woman named Eliah, whom the people called mad, though they feared her more than war. She spoke no words in waking hours, and did not eat by day. But each night, as her eyes closed, the heavens drew near, and her mouth opened, not with cries or riddles, but with the language of the beginning. She dreamed not of fields or beasts, but of the will of the Lord before it touched the earth. And those who heard her speak in sleep trembled, for her dreams were not shadows but swords, not memories but warnings. She told of cities yet to fall, of kings yet to betray, of children yet to rise with fire in their bones. The priests came to silence her, but her dreams saw their secrets, and their hands grew weak. The scribes came to interpret her, but her speech was not for ink or parchment, for her dreams bore neither time nor border. One night a great star fell, and the sky turned the color of old blood. And Eliah cried out in sleep with a voice not hers, saying, The Lord is walking the earth again. But men look to clouds instead of the poor, to thunder instead of truth. Wake, O you sleepers, before the dream becomes judgment. And the people were afraid, but none repented. They shut their doors to her, bound her with silence, and left her to die with the dust. But on the night of her death, the moon did not rise, and the wind did not move. And every child in the land dreamed the same dream, of a river that ran backward, and a lamb crowned in light, weeping. In the dream, a voice said, I spoke through her while you scoffed, I warned through her while you slept. Now you shall dream without waking, and not understand. And from that day the land bore fruit with no taste, and songbirds forgot how to sing. But the few who had listened, the broken, the hungry, the ones without names, they gathered her last words and carried them like seeds. And in hidden places they spoke her dreams in low voices, and light returned to their faces. And thus it is written, Many preach with fire and are forgotten, but the one who dreams with God shall never be silenced. Asterisk, and in the beginning, when the ground was still wet with the voice of the Maker, there was a single stone set apart from the rest. neither precious nor great, but chosen. It had no name, no shine, and no place on any altar, yet it was placed at the edge of the garden, where man would one day weep. And the Lord said to the stone, You shall not move nor speak, but you shall hear. From the first cry to the last, you shall remember. And the stone obeyed. It heard the laughter of Adam and the tears of Eve. It heard the blood of Abel call out from the earth, and the footsteps of Cain as he fled into shadow. It heard the trumpets of Jericho, the whisper of prophets slain, the curses of kings, and the prayers of mothers with empty arms. It heard the chains of the captives, the songs of the faithful in exile, the silence of the temple as the presence withdrew. When the Son of Man walked the earth, the stone heard his footsteps too, and trembled. And when the Lamb cried out from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? The stone cracked down the center, though none saw, yet it did not break. It heard the hush of the tomb, the shout of resurrection, the breath of the Spirit sent like wind into fire. And still the stone remained, uncarved, unknown, beneath dust and root, far from the eyes of those who build. In every war, it heard the cries of the dying. In every betrayal, it heard the whisper of the soul torn in half. It listened to every prayer that never found words, every scream in the night that no one answered, every song sung through tears. And it remembered. For the Lord had said, I will gather all things, and nothing will be lost, not one tear, not one voice. And in the end, when the books are opened, and the sky is folded like a scroll, the stone will be lifted by the hand of the Most High, and placed at the center of the new city. And all who were unheard shall hear, and all who were forgotten shall be named. And the stone shall speak for the first time, saying only what it has heard, and the Lord shall judge not by sight or rumor, but by the witness of the stone. Then thus it is written, though man may not remember, and angels may fall silent, the earth itself bears the voice of the suffering, and God forgets nothing. Asterisk, and there was a barren valley between two blackened hills, a place where no seed took root, and no traveler lingered, for the earth there remembered too much blood. Men had warred there and buried their dead, cursed their enemies and cursed their gods, and the soil had sealed itself shut like a wound that refused the touch of healing. But in the time when prophets no longer roamed, and kings had forgotten righteousness, there came a woman with no name, clothed in sackcloth, with ash in her hair and silence in her mouth. She had fled the ruin of her house, the scorn of her kin, the weight of her own sins, which she carried not in chains, but in her bones. And when she came to the valley, she fell to her knees and wept not once, but day after day, her tears falling into the dust. She spoke no prayer, only let the sorrow of her soul bleed into the ground. And the Lord, who watches the sparrow fall and weighs tears like treasure, beheld her there, and for the first time in generations, the valley trembled. Her tears soaked the soil where swords had rusted, and where bones had turned to shadow. Green began to stir, first a vine, then a blade of grass, and flowers with colors no eye had seen since Eden. The woman did not notice, for her face was still in the dust, and her spirit still pouring out. But others passed by, a thief, a widow, a child with no name, and when they entered the valley, they too were moved to weep, not by sorrow only, but by the weight of grace pressing like dawn through their darkness. And with every tear of repentance, new roots took hold, and blossoms rose where curses had been spoken. In time, the whole valley bloomed, not by seed or sun, but by sorrow met with mercy. The woman grew old and lay down among the flowers, and her grave was marked with no stone, but with the scent of forgiveness. And it is said that those who cannot cry elsewhere find themselves drawn to that garden without knowing why, and leave it lighter, though no voice speaks. And thus it is written, "The ground that bears our guilt can also bloom with grace, and where repentance falls like rain, even the most bitter valley can become a well-watered place." And there was a man who came from no city and bore no seal, no sword, and no crown, but walked with the stillness of oceans and the gravity of mountains. He had no followers, yet those who passed him often turned, and did not know why their burdens felt lighter. He bought nothing, sold nothing, asked nothing, yet he left behind more than merchants and kings. Some said he was mad, others said he was holy, but he called himself nothing, only saying, "I carry a kingdom not made by hands." The rulers mocked him, for they saw no army behind him, no banners before him, no law save mercy. But wherever he walked, small things changed. A well poisoned by greed turned sweet. A dying olive tree bloomed again. A boy born without speech sang for the first time. He was invited by none, yet entered the houses of the poor as if they were palaces. And when he sat at table, the bread multiplied, and the air grew warm with peace. Those with eyes only for gold did not see him, and those with hearts heavy with sorrow saw only light. One day he passed a man who cursed heaven, and he stopped and embraced him, and the man fell silent and wept. Another day he stood beside a grave, and though he said nothing, the morning ended like rain giving way to spring. He wrote no laws, but justice followed his shadow. He gave no commands, but compassion grew wherever his feet had touched. At last, a prince demanded to know where this kingdom was, and the man answered, "Not in lands or maps, but wherever the will of the Father is done." A prince laughed and said, "That is no kingdom at all." And the man replied, "Then why are your soldiers afraid of it?" The man was never seen to die, and some say he was taken up, and others say he still walks, cloaked as a beggar or a brother or a child. But those who meet him do not remember his face, only the peace they felt, as if they had come home. And thus it is written, "Kingdoms fall and crowns are melted, but the reign of the unseen King endures, for he rules not from thrones, but from hearts made ready." Asterisk, and there was a girl born without a name in a village where names were given by fathers, and her father had vanished before her breath began. She was called many things, burden, curse, silence, but never her own. The midwife said she would not live long, for her eyes were too clear and her hands too still, but she lived. She grew with the ache of the unwanted, gathering water when others sang, sweeping dust that was not hers. But though no one taught her, she knew the stories of God, and at night she whispered them to the wind, not from scrolls, but from longing. When she turned 12, a fever struck the village, and she bled for 7 days. And they cast her out beyond the olive grove, saying she was unclean, and death would follow her shadow. Alone she lay beneath a fig tree, burning, trembling, her blood darkening the stones. And in the 7th night, when even the moon had hidden her face, a voice came not from above, but from within her ribs, saying, "You are not forgotten." And as she opened her eyes, she saw letters, not written on parchment, not spoken aloud, but glowing on her skin, flowing like fire along her veins. She saw one letter on each hand, another on her side, one beneath her throat, and they burned, but did not consume. She asked, "What is this?" And the voice said, "My name, written not with ink, but with pain and purpose. For you have borne rejection without hatred, silence without despair. My name is not always spoken by prophets or sung by angels. Sometimes it is carved in flesh that refuses to curse." She rose, still weak, still bleeding, but she walked. And wherever she stepped, the sick were healed, and the lost remembered themselves. The elders, hearing of wonders, came to question her, but when they asked for doctrine, she showed her scars. When they asked for teaching, she held out her hands, and the letters glowed. They could not read them, for their eyes sought scrolls, not wounds. But the children followed her, and the dying called her blessed. In time her body faded, but her name, the true name, remained, carried in the mouths of those who had once had none. And it is said the angels do not speak that name, but they bow when they hear it. And thus it is written, not all who bear the name do so with crowns or songs. Some bear it in blood and silence, and are closest to the heart of God. Asterisk and there was far beyond the known roads, a mountain that no one climbed, for it was not marked by stars nor maps, but by silence, and at its peak there stood no shrine, no monument, only a patch of stone bare as bone. Yet once every 1,000 years, when the stars aligned as they had in the beginning, when the wind forgot its name, and the moon hid behind the veil, the stone would crack, and from its center a seed would rise, glowing faintly, and the earth would tremble just enough to open its arms. The seed would root, and a tree would grow, not fast, not tall, but true, and its trunk would shimmer like silver and hum softly, as if remembering a lullaby no one had sung since Eden. The tree bore no fruit, cast no shadow, and lived for only one day. It came not for harvest or glory, but for one soul, and only one. The one whose cry had reached heaven when all others slept. The one whose grief could not be spoken. The one whose name had been nearly forgotten, even by themselves. The tree knew this soul, not by merit, but by pain, and its branches bent not toward the sky, but downward, toward the valley of exile, toward the path of wandering. And the tree would wait, silent, fragrant with something no word could hold. And when the one arrived, broken, breathless, without hope, they would see it not with their eyes, but with their hunger. They would fall beneath its branches, not knowing why their knees gave way, and the tree would release a single drop of sap, clear as glass, sweet as first mercy. And as the drop touched their lips, the name of God would rise in their chest, not spoken, but known. The tree would vanish, the stone would seal, and no one would see it again for another 1,000 years. But the one would descend the mountain, changed, not louder, not brighter, but steadier, like one who carried something eternal just behind the heart. And they would go on to heal wounds they did not cause, to forgive before being asked, to listen longer than the world had patience for. No one would understand them. Some would call them fools, but the heavens would watch, and the earth would remember. And thus it is written, even time yields to the mercy of God, and for one soul 1,000 years are not too long to wait. Asterisk, and there was a man in the desert who heard the voice of the Lord each morning, not in thunder nor wind, but in the quiet place between sleep and waking, when shadows are thin and truth stands without cloak. He was neither prophet nor priest, neither scribe nor king, but a man with calloused hands and a heart like an empty jar waiting for rain. A voice came not with visions or commandments, but with an earnest that burned without fire. And the Lord said to him, you shall hear me, but you shall never repeat what I say. The man fell to his knees and wept, saying, how will the people know? And the Lord answered, they shall know by the way you walk. And so the man obeyed. He spoke of daily things, of wells and sheep and bread, but in his silence was a weight that drew the broken near. People came from cities and wilderness, drawn not by miracle or sign, but by something they could not name. They sat beside him and wept without knowing why. They left healed, though no healing was spoken. Kings sent for him, asking for prophecy. But he said only, the sun will rise, and you must decide how to stand in its light. Scholars demanded doctrine, and he replied, truth is not afraid to sit in silence. Some accused him of witchcraft, for he changed men without touching them. Others said he must be mad, for who would hear God and keep still? But he said nothing of the voice. At night, alone, he would lift his face to the stars, and the voice would come again, gentle as breath on still water, and the Lord would say, I have no need to be repeated, only received. And the man would smile and weep, filled with a joy too vast for language. He died without fame, buried beneath wildflowers in a place unnamed, but those who had met him carried peace like oil in their bones. And their children spoke softer, and their enemies grew fewer, and justice grew roots in places where swords once reigned. And thus it is written, some are called to speak the fire, others to carry the warmth in silence, and the world is changed by both. Asterisk, and there was a city hidden beyond the reach of empire and map, a city that fell each night and stood again with the dawn, not by stone or strength, but by prayer. The people did not know this, for their memories reset with the morning sun. They believed they lived in peace, unaware that every day was rebuilt from ruin. But in one small house by the edge of the market lived an old woman who remembered. Each night when the shadows thickened and the sky dimmed, a great darkness would rise like a wave and crash upon the city, shattering gates, crumbling walls, swallowing light, and she alone remained awake. Her house would shake, her roof would groan, and she would light her lamp, kneel beside her window, and whisper, Lord, if you still see, do not forget this place. Her voice was thin, her bones frail, her words few, but heaven bent low each time she prayed. Angels passed by and did not speak, but they lingered. The darkness recoiled, confused by the flicker of one soul it could not devour. And when morning came, the city stood again. Vendors opened stalls, children played, and no one spoke of the ruin, for they had no memory of it. But the woman remembered. She walked the streets with quiet eyes, noting cracks no one saw, wounds no one felt. Once a stranger came, robed in white, and asked her, Why do you pray for those who do not know? And she answered, Because he knows, and that is enough. The stranger bowed and vanished like smoke. Years passed. Her hands grew slower, her breath shorter, but her prayer did not cease. One night, as the city fell again, her voice faltered, and she whispered only his name. And that night, the city stood without falling. At dawn, the bells rang louder, the air sweeter, and children spoke of dreams filled with light. The woman did not rise. Her lamp was cold. But where she had prayed, a tree grew, though no seed had been planted, and its fruit tasted like mercy. And thus it is written, A city is not kept by walls nor soldiers, but by the prayer of one who will not forget. And though her name be unknown, her faith shall rebuild what the world cannot hold. Asterisk, and in the days when the stars fell silent and the prophets spoke only in dreams, there was said to be a book sealed sevenfold, not with wax, but with sorrow, bound not in leather, but in silence, resting on an altar no man had dared to touch. The book was not written in ink, but in the fire of God's own breath, and its letters shifted like wind on water, unreadable to the proud, the clever, the righteous in their own eyes. It was kept in a hidden place called the Chamber of the Threshold, where angels stood guard not with swords, but with grief on their brows, for they had seen what the book contained and wept. Many sought the book. Kings came with gold, scholars with scrolls, priests with robes clean and voices full of polished doctrine. But when they opened it, they saw only emptiness, or worse, their own reflections twisted into accusation. 4. The book could not be read by those who thought themselves whole. It could only be opened by one whose heart had been broken, and yet remained open, like a wound that refused to close, so that grace might pour through. Generations passed. Wars raged, temples crumbled, empires rose and died, and the book waited. Then there came a man from the ruins of a nameless village, walking slowly, leaning on a staff worn smooth from years of sorrow. His face was lined not by age, but by loss, the kind of loss that is not spoken of, only carried. He had buried children, survived famine, been betrayed by friends, forgotten by those he had loved. And yet he had not cursed God. He had looked to the sky in his hunger and said only, "If you still write, I am listening." The angels watched as he entered the chamber. He did not demand, did not kneel, did not tremble. He only wept. And as his tears fell upon the altar, the seals began to break, not with noise, but with a sound like breath returning to the lungs of the dead. The book opened for him, and he saw not words, but wounds. Each page was a story of a soul shattered, and yet still singing, of faith held in darkness, of prayers spoken when no answer came. He did not read with his eyes, but with his scars, and the book received him. He stayed there 3 days and 3 nights, and when he rose, the book closed itself again, and his hands bore no mark but peace. He returned to the world and said, "Little only touched the sick, and they were soothed, listened to the angry, and they grew quiet, sat with the forgotten, and they remembered who they were." People asked him what the book had said, and he replied, "It says what the broken already know, and what the proud cannot hear." A young woman followed him and asked, "Will I ever be worthy to read it?" He looked at her with kindness and said, "Do. Not seek to be worthy, just remain open. In time, you will bleed in ways no one sees, and then you will understand." He died alone, beneath a tree that grew from a battlefield, and the wind carried his last breath like a psalm. The book remains sealed to this day, waiting not for power nor brilliance, but for the one whose pain has made room for God. And thus it is written, "The greatest truths are not shouted from mountains nor carved in stone, but whispered through." Wounds, and only those who have been broken without bitterness, can carry the word that cannot be spoken. Asterisk, and in the time of great forgetting, when even the faithful questioned the sky and the temples echoed with silence, there was said to be a lamp made before the sun, forged not with hands, but in the longing of God himself, and it gave no light to the proud, nor to those who still counted their gold, nor to those who had names carved into stone. It was hidden beneath a ruined well at the edge of the desert, and though many searched for it, none found it, for they sought with maps and weapons and blessings spoken too loudly. But one night a widow came, barefoot and weeping, her last son, buried in the sand behind her, her home burned, her name forgotten. She fell beside the well, not praying for light, only asking, "Let me sleep without waking." And the lamp, without flame, opened its eye. For the lamp did not respond to need alone, but to the kind of loss that makes a soul transparent. And the woman glowed, not with fire, but with a pale golden hush, like dawn in winter. She did not see it, but the desert did, and the stones warmed. She slept and dreamed of a child not dead, but waiting. When she awoke, her hands were empty, but her heart held something soft, not hope, not joy, but a stillness that had shape. Others came, broken in different ways. A father who had lost his voice to guilt, a girl cast out by her kin, a man who had carried war within his chest too long, and when they lay down at the well without asking for light, the lamp saw them. To each it gave a different glow. Some saw the faces of the forgiven, others heard songs they had never sung. But to all it gave one thing, the ability to keep walking. Word spread, though not through proclamation, only by changed footsteps. Gentler words, hands that healed without knowing why. A soldier once found the well, still holding his sword, and demanded light. The lamp did not stir. He shouted scripture, commanded angels, struck the stones. Nothing. But years later, when he returned, bloodied, trembling, with nothing left but breath, he fell upon the sand and said nothing. And the lamp opened like a breath remembered. And thus it is written, there is a light the world cannot see, hidden from those who demand, revealed to those undone. And the ones who carry that light do not shine, but walk through shadows, leaving warmth behind them. Asterisk, and there was a sea, vast beyond chart and storm, older than the stars and deeper than the pit of death. And it did not obey men, nor moon, nor the laws of tide. For it was the sea that listens, but it heard only the voice of the just. Many ships crossed it, and many sank, and the captains cursed it, or begged it, or commanded it in the name of kings and gods. But the sea did not stir. It swallowed armies and merchants alike, and it mourned none. But it was told among the desert, tribes and the mountain keepers, that once, long ago, a man stood on its edge and whispered a name not written in any book, and the waves grew still as glass. Since then, the sea waited, wild and wordless, for another who would speak not from pride or power, but from a life that bore no violence in it. And so time and many came, prophets with scrolls, warriors with scars, judges with clean robes, but the sea did not answer them. Then there came a shepherd boy, born in exile, taught not in schools but in silence. He had no father to bless him, no roof to sleep beneath, but he carried no hate, not even for those who struck him. One day, driven by dream or wind, he came to the shore. He knelt, not knowing why, and said softly, I do not seek to cross you, only to be heard. And the sea, which had drowned kings, leaned forward. The boy spoke not of doctrine, but of hunger, not of glory, but of mercy. He wept for cities he had never seen, and forgave enemies he had never met. And the sea rose, not in anger, but in reverence. The waves parted, and fish gathered beneath the surface, listening. He sang then, not a song taught, but a sound born, in the marrow of justice, and the sea held its breath. For 7 days he stayed, saying little, and the sea kept still. When he rose to leave, the water whispered a blessing only he could hear, and he did not speak of it again. But where he walked inland, springs followed. Crops grew where salt had spoiled the earth. Children slept deeper, and griefs passed quicker. Sailors later swore the sea grew calmer for a generation. And thus it is written, the sea, like the heart of God, does not yield to power, but listens for the one whose justice flows like water, and whose words are never spoken for their own sake. And it was told in the hills of the forgotten country that there was a stone unlike any other, not because of its size or color, but because it remembered, not in thought, but in song. This stone lay buried among others, smooth and silent. Yet it held within it a melody, forged at the beginning, a song that could not be forced nor summoned, only awakened by one whose hands were free of harm. Many passed over it, merchants with honest mouths and hearts that still crushed the poor, priests with clean garments and eyes that looked away from suffering, warriors who claimed to fight for peace but thirsted for praise. And to them, the stone was cold. It sang only once in 100 years, and even then, only if touched by innocence not of ignorance, but of refusal to become like the world, even when the world offered reward. Then came a child, nameless and dusty, walking alone not out of pride, but because none had walked with him. He had once been struck and chose not to strike back. He had been mocked and chose not to curse. He had found a coin and gave it away. He had been hungry and shared his crust. And when he came to that field, he sat among the stones and placed his hand gently upon the one that remembered. And the stone began to hum, soft at first, like wind in a cradle, then rising like light, through leaves until the earth around it shivered with joy. The child did not move, but tears filled his eyes, not from sorrow, but from the knowing that he was seen, not by men, but by something older and kinder than judgment. The song told of creation, of mercy woven into dust, of wrongs undone not by might, but by grace repeated again and again. Birds gathered, animals came near, even the sky seemed to lean in, and the child slept beside the stone, and the melody entered his bones. When he woke, the song had ceased, but the peace remained. He never told anyone, but everywhere he walked, quarrels softened and hearts turned. And the stone? It sank again into the earth, silent until another century, waiting not for the strong or the learned, but for the one who would rather lose than harm, who would rather be forgotten than betray. And thus it is written, creation itself testifies, and there are stones that still sing, but only to the hands that have never stolen, and to the hearts that choose innocence though they know the cost. Asterisk, and there was a man who walked among the nations and was known by none, for he did not speak of himself nor write his name. Yet the earth bent gently wherever he passed. He was called by many titles in many tongues, the bearer, the vessel, the mourner, but none knew whence he came, nor where he lay his head. He remembered the pain of the world as others remember stories told in childhood, vividly, deeply, unshakably. He remembered the cries of mothers in famine, the silence of fathers defeated in war, the trembling of children who had lost everything, the betrayal of friends, the ruin of the innocent, the despair of prophets unheard. And he wept, not once, but constantly, though no tear touched his face. For he carried sorrow like breath, invisible, but always with him. Yet of his own wounds he had no memory. If you asked him what had broken him, he would pause and say, I do not recall. And this was true, not because he had never suffered, but because he had made a covenant in the secret place, to remember only the pain of others, and let his own be consumed as offering. He walked into cities that were burning and left behind gardens. He sat beside kings who had forgotten mercy and spoke one sentence that made them dream again. He passed beggars and bandits alike and left something behind that could not be seen, only felt like warmth in the chest long after the fire dies. Some say he once entered a temple and stood where none had dared, and the idols cracked without him lifting a hand. Others say he met the angel of the abyss and offered him no resistance, and the angel turned away, unable to bear the mirror. Once a child asked him, Are you not tired? And he smiled and said, I am, but I am carried. Who carries you? The child asked. He knelt then and whispered, The one who remembers me, though I do not. In time he grew old, though no one saw him age. When he lay down in a cave beneath the mountain of forgotten names, the wind covered him in dust, and no one marked his grave. But in dreams the suffering still see him, standing just behind the veil, not speaking, only present, and when they wake, the weight is lessened, and they do not know why. And thus it is written, There are those who bear the pain of the world, not with complaint nor crown, but with silence, and the memory of others becomes their song, and their reward is not remembrance, but the lessening of sorrow where no one else dared to look. Asterisk, and there was once a place that was not a place, not marked on maps nor sung in songs, for it had no walls, no gates, no name, only a promise unspoken, and a waiting too deep for words. It was said that long ago, at the edge of the wilderness where no road dared continue, there was a field of dust and broken stone, and none passed through it twice. Kings ignored it, for it held no gold. Scribes passed over it, for it told no story. Warriors avoided it, for it hid no enemy. It was a land forsaken by all but time. Until one day a woman came, weary and without destination, having fled sorrow too great to carry, and yet carried still. She did not speak to the wind nor pray aloud. She only sat. And where she sat, the earth remembered rain. She planted no seed, but where her tears fell, something took root. She did not leave. Days passed, then years. Travelers saw her and said, "Why here?" She only smiled and said, "Because no one else would." A second came, a man with burned hands who had lost all but breath. She welcomed him not with food, but with presents, and he stayed. A third, a child born of violence, found them and spoke his first true word, home. They built no walls, drew no borders, yet slowly others came, the tired, the cast out, the quiet faithful, and they brought with them not wealth, but remembrance, and the city began to breathe, not in stone, but in mercy, not in towers, but in tables shared. And when the scribes returned and asked what name this place bore, they found only this written in dust: "It began when we refused to leave." And so the city grew, a city built not of strength, but of staying, not of law, but of love. No army guarded it, yet no enemy could enter, for those who came to conquer found themselves disarmed by peace. The city had no throne, for its ruler was the one who knelt first. No temple, for every home was holy. And when strangers arrived, lost and afraid, they were given not doctrine but bread, and not judgment but rest. And thus it is written, "The cities of the world rise in power and fall in pride, but the city of the beloved rises only where love refuses to abandon. And its foundations are made of those who stayed when there was no reason, but love alone." And in the days when truth was traded like silver, and spoken to gain and twisted into thrones, there was said to be a crow, blacker than shadow and older than fear, who perched on no roof and followed no flock, but flew between the ruins of hearts. This crow did not speak as other birds, nor croak, nor cry, but it carried in its breast a voice not its own, a voice that did not flatter nor accuse, but spoke what was not as men see, but as eternity sees. Yet the crow would not speak to all, nor to most, nor even to many. It flew past palaces and temples, past scribes with sharpened ink and judges with clean hands, past prophets with loud mouths and warriors with holy cause, for it knew the pride. Beneath each robe, it waited, it watched. And when it saw one broken, not outwardly, but inwardly, one whose name had been forgotten, whose cause had failed, whose hope had turned to dust, it descended, not with flapping wings, but like a shadow made of mercy. And it would perch near the lost one, and speak, not aloud, but into the marrow, like memories suddenly remembered. To one it said, "The one who left did love you, though he could not stay." To another, "You are not wrong to walk away." To another, "Yes, you did harm, but you have not become harm." These were not comforting lies, but truths that only those emptied of defense could bear. And when they heard them, they wept, not from sorrow, but from the lifting of weight they no longer knew they carried. And when they asked the crow, "Why me?" it only looked at them with eyes like still water and said, "Because you no longer needed to be right." Some cursed the crow, saying it did not speak when they prayed, nor answer when they fasted. But it is written, "The crow speaks only when silence has finished its work, and truth cannot live in a house full of noise." In time, the crow was seen. More often, not because suffering grew, but because surrender did. And those who heard its truth began to speak differently, and to listen as if each soul might be carrying something too heavy to name. They did not become mighty, nor many, but wherever they went, lies weakened. And thus it is written, "There is a truth that hides from the strong, a truth that waits for the undone, and a voice that speaks not to win arguments, but to heal the wound beneath the words." And in a land where nothing green had grown for generations, where the soil was bitter and the sky closed like iron, there was a story told by the old and the broken, that there was a tree, not tall nor wide, but full of fruit no hand could rot. And it would grow not from seed nor rain nor toil, but only in a place where one had forgiven an enemy completely. Many mocked the tale, for who would give up vengeance in a land that worshipped memory? And who would plant love where blood still cried from the ground? But some had tried, half-hearted, forgiving with lips, but not with heart, and nothing rose but dust. Until one day, in the forgotten corner of a forgotten village, a woman whose sister had been taken, and whose son had been left to die, walked the dry field where her enemy had fallen in battle. She carried no stone, no blade, no curse. She knelt and whispered, "I will not carry you any longer. You are not my burden. Go in peace." She did not expect anything, only silence. But in the days that followed, the wind changed. The earth trembled once, gently, like a breath remembered. And one morning, she found there a shoot, small, pale, trembling. She said nothing. She did not tell the priests nor the town. She simply watered it and watched. The tree grew slowly, not as others do, but with memory in its bark and kindness in its leaves. When it first bore fruit, she did not eat it, but gave it to the children of the one who had harmed her. They did not know her name. She only smiled and left. But others saw, and slowly the story changed from a legend to a question. What if it were true? And here and there across the wasteland, trees began to grow, always after a silence, always after a letting go. They never grew where someone demanded justice. They never grew where pride remained. But wherever someone whispered, "I release you, not because you were right, but because I will not be ruled by your wrong," the ground opened like a wound that had finally exhaled. And the trees became signs not of power, but of freedom, not for those who had conquered, but for those who had laid down the sword within. And thus it is written, where the world sees weakness, heaven plants roots, and the fruit of the tree that grows from forgiveness will feed generations who never knew the wound. Asterisk. And it was spoken in the forgotten scrolls that there was a door, unlike any other, not made of wood or stone, but of something more ancient, something no hand could carve and no eye could measure. It stood in the center of a wilderness no one could map, and yet many claimed to have passed it. For the door could not be seen by those who demanded to see, nor opened by those who believed they had earned its opening. Many sought it, teachers, certain of their doctrines, kings proud of their fairness, pilgrims proud of their humility, and all stood before it and declared, "I am right. Let me pass." But the door did not move, did not shine, did not speak. Some struck it and called it false. Others built temples around it and forgot it was a door. But then one came, a man weary of argument, not because he had lost, but because he had won too many and found nothing on the other side. He knelt, not in worship, but in surrender, and he placed his hand on the door and whispered, "I release my need to be right. I release even my truth. If I must be wrong to pass, let it be so." And the door, silent for ages, shivered like dawn in the bones of the earth, and opened not outward nor inward, but downward, like a well drawing him into depth. On the other side was no throne, no light, no reward, only a stillness so full it felt like embrace. And there he saw others, not many, just a few, seated without titles, without arguments, and in their eyes was a clarity deeper than knowledge. They spoke, but not to correct. They listened, but not to prepare answers. They dwelled, and in their dwelling was truth, not as a blade, but as a balm. And the man wept, for he had spent his years sharpening truth like a spear, and now found it to be soft as bread broken in silence. He did not return with teachings. He did not write a book. He simply walked and listened. And those who met him did not always agree with him, but they left with less fear. And thus it is written, the door that leads to peace will not open to the one who must be right, but to the one who would rather be kind than victorious, silent than justified, present than proven. Asterisk, and there was a desert so vast that even the stars had forgotten its name. A land without song, where wind moved but nothing followed, and bones turned to dust before they could be buried. No road crossed it, for even the desperate feared its silence, and no prayer rose from it, for all hope had long since withered. It was said no heart could survive there, not for lack of food or water, but for lack of echo. Yet one day a man entered it with no pack, no camel, no witness, only a small bowl and a heart full of ache. He did not speak, for he had no audience. He did not cry out, for no one would answer. He simply walked, and as he walked, he poured out love like water from the bowl, not to people, for there were none, but to the land itself, to the cracked earth. He said, you are still worthy. To the silent air, he said, you are still holy. To the empty horizon, he said, I am still here. Each step was a giving without return, each breath a gift no one requested. He did not know why he loved this barren place, only that something in him would not let go. Days passed, then weeks. The bowl remained full, though he never refilled it. And one morning, when he placed his hand on the ground and whispered, even if nothing ever changes, I will still love you, the earth gave a single sound, like a sigh long held. From that place a spring broke, not sudden or violent, but deep and slow and steady, like truth finally allowed. The water did not rush, but flowed. The man did not weep, but smiled. And wherever the water touched, life awoke, not all at once, but in secret, in roots and seeds thought long dead. Travelers came, drawn by stories of the river in the wasteland, and asked him, what did you do? And he replied, I did not love to change it. I loved because it was unloved. Some called him foolish, others called him prophet. He called himself nothing. He simply stayed by the river, still pouring from the bowl that never emptied, still speaking love to the silence. And thus it is written, the river does not rise for the mighty, nor the wise, nor the deserving, but for the one who loves where no reward waits. And in that love, the desert forgets its name. Asterisk, and it was told among the scattered ones, those who kept no scrolls and wore no robes, that in the beginning was not just the word, but the language behind all words, a tongue pure as light before it touches the world. This language had no grammar, for it was not built but breathed, and it could not be taught, only revealed. It did not serve persuasion, for it could not lie. It was not spoken by those who knew much, but by those who had nothing left to hide. Long had people searched for this tongue, scribes who mastered law, prophets who mastered vision, kings who mastered command, but none found it. For though they spoke with clarity, their hearts trembled with contradiction, and the language would not live where division ruled. But there were a few, not many, who did not even seek the language. Yet it came to them. There was a girl who had lost everything, even her name, and when she stopped pretending she was not afraid, she began to hear songs in silence and speak things she never learned. There was an old man who had once taught many and failed many. More, and when he stopped defending his goodness, a voice rose in him, not his, but true. And there was a woman who no longer tried to be kind, but simply was, and the wind began to echo her thoughts before she spoke. Those who heard them did not always understand the words, but they were changed. For the language carried not facts, but being, not argument, but presence. It could not be countered because it made no claim. It could not be manipulated because it desired nothing. It was the sound of the soul unveiled. And so it is written, "The true language will not dwell in the mouth of the righteous, if their heart is afraid to look at itself, nor in the lips of the eloquent, if their silence hides shame. But to the one who has ceased all pretense, who can say, I was wrong, I do not know, I am afraid, I am still beloved, to that one the tongue returns like a lost breath, and speaks again the language that was before the world learned to hide." Asterisk. And there was once a city of great renown, built upon 7 towers of glass and silver, with streets that shimmered beneath the feet of kings and merchants and prophets, where every word spoken echoed in polished stone, and only the loudest were heard. The city was proud of its voice, for it held councils of law, and halls of wisdom, and temples of song, where each voice fought to be heard, and each truth weighed like coin. He swept the dust from floors that shone without noticing him, and each day he watched the debates of the proud and the righteous, each certain of their cause, each certain of their clarity, each raising their voices higher until understanding became thunder and no longer truth. The man did not argue. He did not raise his hand, but he listened. And over time, he began to hear what others did not: the ache beneath the cleverness, the fear beneath the fire, the loneliness beneath the certainty. He saw that the voices in the city did not reach one another, but circled like birds chasing their own shadows. And one morning, when the city gathered in the central square to settle the greatest dispute of the age, a question of judgment and grace, of law and love, which none could agree upon, the man stood at the edge of the crowd, not to speak, but to bear witness. The orators stood tall, the judges made proclamations, the scribes rolled out precedent, the priests quoted flame, but the crowd could not choose, and the voices clashed like swords, until all sound became noise and all words turned into wind. And in that noise, without raising his voice, the man spoke. It was not a speech. It was a sentence. It was not loud. But because he had never spoken before, and because he spoke without defense, without demand, without pride, the city fell silent. No one could explain why, but the moment his words left his lips, even the wind stopped, even the birds paused. The towers held their breath. He said, "None of you are wrong, but none of you are listening." And in that silence, something broke. Not in anger, but in release. People wept, others knelt. A few fled. And for the first time, the city heard not only what was said, but what had never been spoken. They asked the man to speak again, to become teacher, or judge, or priest. But he only shook his head and returned to his sweeping. And the city changed. Slowly, then more. They began to listen before answering. They made space between words. The councils shortened. The halls grew quiet. And when people spoke, they spoke more gently, as if aware they were speaking into sacred air. And thus it is written, when the unheard one speaks, the city must fall silent. For the truth that cannot be argued is the truth that comes without defense, not to win, not to rise, but to remind us that the quietest among us sometimes carry the last clear word. And it was told in the days when the world had grown tired of miracles, and men no longer looked beneath their feet, that the stones of the earth were once alive with memory. Not the gold nor the gems, but the common stones, the ones worn by time and stepped on without thought. They had seen the truth of every footstep and heard every vow made and broken, every cry in the night, every silent prayer buried beneath noise. In the beginning, they sang quietly, songs without words, echoes of harmony woven into creation itself. But as the hearts of men grew louder, and the voices of pride rose, the stones fell silent, for no one listened. And so they waited. Through empires and famines, through temples built and torn down, through wars waged in the name of heaven and hell alike, they waited beneath sandals, hooves, wheels, and boots. They waited under cities and altars. They waited without anger, without need, only with memory. And then there came a day, not marked by stars or signs, when a child wandered into a field of forgotten stone. She was not wise. She was not holy. But she was honest. She did not ask the stones for anything. She simply sat among them, placing her hand upon one, and whispered, "I do not know what to do." And the stone beneath her warmed, not with fire, but with awareness. Others would have thought it the sun, but she listened, truly listened. And in her listening, the stones began to hum, softly, gently, a song older than language, made, not of melody, but of presence. The child did not run. She listened for hours. And the stones, once silent for generations, remembered how to speak, not in human tongue, but in a knowing that entered the heart. More came, not crowds, not pilgrims, just the broken, the quiet, the ones who no longer trusted words. They came not to command, but to be near. And the stones began to sing again, each with a different voice, some deep like rivers beneath mountains, some high like wind touching snow. They sang not of what was desired, but of what had always been. And those who listened found they know. Longer needed answers, only presence. The priests tried to build shrines there, but the songs stopped. The rulers tried to fence it, but the stones grew cold. Only when left unguarded, unclaimed, unproven, did the stones sing again. And thus it is written, when the proud stop shouting, and the clever stop speaking, and the sorrowful stop hiding, the earth itself will remember its voice, and the stones that were once forgotten will rise in song to those who ask nothing, only to be near what is true. And there was a fire in the world that no one could see, a flame passed down not by blood, but by mercy, not by conquest, but by surrender. It did not burn in hearths or altars or torches raised by armies. It lived only in those who had been wronged, and chose not to return the wound. From the beginning, the fire had waited for such moments, kindled not by fury, but by restraint, growing not in shouts, but in silence that forgave. And in every generation, though few, there were some who carried it. A brother betrayed, but who embraced his betrayer in tears. A mother whose son was taken, but who prayed not for justice, but for peace. A friend who was slandered, but spoke no. Poison in return. Each time such a heart was offered unguarded, the fire grew, not visibly, not with smoke or sparks, but with invisible brightness that warmed the soul of the world. No one could measure it, no one could name it. But when kingdoms fell and vengeance reigned, it was this hidden flame that kept the earth from freezing over in bitterness. There were times when the fire seemed almost gone, in days of war, in ages of betrayal, when cruelty was law and kindness was laughed from the streets. But still it flickered, in huts where enemies shared bread, in prisons where forgiveness was whispered between bars, in battlefields where one soldier spared another. The scholars could not record it, the powerful could not command it, and those who bore it never claimed they did. Yet they left warmth behind wherever they walked. Some said it was weakness, but those who had carried it knew it took more strength to choose mercy than revenge, to remain open in pain than to strike back. And one day, it is told, the fire will rise, not in violence, but in stillness, and all the world will feel it as light, not from the sun, but from within. And thus it is written, the greatest flame is not the one that consumes, but the one that endures. And every soul who forgives when they could destroy becomes a living lamp in a world that still hopes for morning. Asterisk, and it was in the days when the earth was loud with voices of authority and law and lineage, when only those crowned with age, or clothed in symbols were heard, that a child was born in a village so small it had no name upon the maps of kings. The people there were weary and wise in the way the suffering are wise, knowing not everything, but enough to speak little. They lived by silence, by work, by old stories told around fading fires. But in that village, the child grew, and from her earliest steps she asked questions that made even the old stop and stare, not because they were clever, but because they were unguarded. She did not fear the truth, for she did not yet know what fear was supposed to be. One evening, the elders gathered, as they always did, to settle a matter of justice between neighbors. There were rules and customs, records and oaths, and when they had finished their judgments, the people nodded, though their eyes remained unsure. The child had watched, unseen behind her mother's robe, and as the moon rose high in silence, she stepped forward. The crowd did not notice until her voice, small but clear, broke through. "That is not fair." At first there was laughter, then discomfort. One of the elders bent down and asked what she meant. And the child said, "You made a rule, but you forgot to love." The words struck like lightning without thunder. No one could answer, for they knew, not in their minds, but in their bones, that she had seen what they had hidden even from themselves. And in that moment, the moon, full and watching, began to lower, not in illusion, not in dream, but in quiet descent, as though bowing to the earth, to the child, to the truth. All looked upward. None could explain it. And when the child walked back into the shadows, the village remained still, and something within them had shifted. From that night on, when disputes arose, they would ask, would the child call this love? Not law, not logic, not fear of consequence, but love. And thus it is written, the heavens do not bend to the mighty or the wise, but to the pure, not because they are better, but because they are unhidden. And the truth that terrifies the powerful is the one spoken by a child who does not yet know how to lie.